lived in the residence.
Correct.
And I do find, Mr. Burgess, this is a probable cause hearing, and the standard is much less than what would be required at trial. I think there are going to be more layers to this case, but I do find that the state's met its burden of probable cause. I've listened carefully to the testimony with regard to Ms. Lee. I don't find, I find that there's sufficient evidence, although is it a more unique charge on felony murder because the predicate offense is false imprisonment? That does meet the standard under the law for felony murder. And how the false imprisonment, at least based on the testimony I heard, I find that there's sufficient evidence for that charge as well under the totality of the circumstances, the blend of both circumstantial and direct evidence that's been given to me today. Of course, the interesting thing that comes up at preliminary hearings is there might be more witnesses, but the only witness I received today was the state's witness recounting the testimony, recounting the investigation in this case thus far. So I am binding over all of the felony warrants as to Ms. Lee, 23W17141 for false statements, 23W17139 concealing the death of another, 23W17140 tampering with evidence, 23W17138 felony murder, and 23W17137 as false imprisonment. I just, for purposes of probable cause, am not persuaded by the she was free to leave argument in this particular hearing as to your client in particular for purposes of this finding. As far as with regard to bond, I know you are an excellent attorney, Mr. Burgess, and have probably already instructed Ms. Lee, but this court is without jurisdiction to consider any bond given the nature of the felony murder charge. So Ms. Lee, Mr. Burgess will instruct you as to what happens next, but all I have done is allowed the case to continue. That's it. All right, Mr. Drake.
Judge, for purposes of this hearing, I'm dismissed.
Okay. You're not going to make it's an interesting argument on that gang charge, but you're just going to leave it on the dance floor, so to speak. I do find, based on the totality of the circumstances, Mr. Junho David Lee, I have paid very careful attention, but again, all I'm doing today is determining whether the state's met its threshold burden of probable cause. I will tell you, anyone who's been in front of me, I've reviewed all the code sections in great detail before I came out. I reviewed all of the warrants. I created a chart and I have them all in front of me. So based on my interpretation of the law at this point, including the definition of criminal street gang as the law requires me to apply, I do find that the state's met its threshold burden of probable cause for all the warrants related to Mr. Junho Lee, that is 23W15987, 15984, 15985, and 15986. Those are concealing the death of another, false imprisonment, felony murder, and tampering with evidence. And then the gang charges that are 23W16048, 042, 047, 044, 049, 045, 050, 046, 043, and 045. Although I'm sure there are going to be some interesting arguments in a subsequent hearing about that gang charge. This isn't anything other than a strict interpretation of the statute for purposes of today's proceeding.
I'm sorry, right now it's not being translated.
Oh, it's not being translated? Are you not translating? I'm looking at you, ladies. Are either one of you translating? Oh, okay.
Can you hear? So he could hear, but it's too fast, so he's not.
Oh, I thought I was being slower than I normally speak, but I'll stay. Basically, to reiterate, the gang charges, I do find that at least for purposes of probable cause, and I will share with counsel that I reviewed the statute that defines criminal street gang. The predicate offenses as defined by that statute or any offense defined as a racketeering activity under 1614.3 which I pulled, and false imprisonment, tampering with evidence, and homicide are in fact predicate offenses under that statute. A, B, and D don't have anything to do with money, which is an interesting argument. But again, for purposes of probable cause, I do find that there's sufficient evidence to bind over those gang charges with regard to Mr. Lee. Mr. Park, do you have any argument?
On behalf of Mr. Jun Lee, the defense submits.
Yeah, I figured when I tried to explain it that that would happen when I ruled, but I hope Mr. Park and Mr. Lee, you understand that I paid attention and I came out prepared. Although it's just a probable cause hearing, I understand that I have to look at the offenses and every element therein to determine whether probable cause it has been sufficiently met as the state's burden. And I do find also, Mr. Lee, that the state's met its burden with your warrants that are 23W15993, 15994, 15992, 15991, and those are for tampering with evidence, concealing the death of another, felony murder, and false imprisonment, as well as the gang charges 23W16060, 063, 056, 059, 057, 055, 058, 062, and 061. Mr. Kim, I wonder if you're going to say I just submit too, unless there's a brilliant argument that you would like me to consider, which I would be happy to do.
Judge, on behalf of Mr. Lee, we will submit as well. With the exception to the criminal street gang, I understand the court's argument.
It's not really an argument, it's just my interpretation of the law, because in reviewing these warrants, and that's all I had, obviously, when I came, I usually pull the code sections and I pulled them to cross-reference, but I know there's probably going to be some arguments about this later, but enlighten me if there's something I have missed or omitted or failed to consider.
And Judge, I'm going to keep it extremely short. I think
No
the
worries.
testimony of Detective Ricks did not identify sufficient evidence that Mr. Callum Lee was not only a member, but trying to maintain or gain or join the status of the alleged soldiers of Christ.
And I think my determination on probable cause related to that is the admission by all of the defendants that they were members of the organization. And there was the testimony about the patch and about the initiation, the postures, the enough, I guess, ceremony to it, for lack of a better way to put it. I am interested about how the argument, it is unique in the sense that usually a gang activity has to do with money or drugs or something a little more basic. But the interesting thing about it is that the definition of criminal street gang is fairly broad under the law. And I think it's met for purposes of this hearing, right? And then your client having admitted, and that the testimony related to what your client did as part of the recruitment and initiation process is sufficient on a probable cause standard. So I just feel like I'm going to give you the reason why I'm binding it over. But I do find Mr. Lee that warrant number 23W16001, 15999, 16000, and 16002 for tampering with evidence, false imprisonment, felony murder, concealing the death of another are bound over the state having met its burden on probable cause. With regard to 23W16073, 075, 074, 072, 070, and 071, the gang charges for the reasons previously stated, I do find the state's also met its burden for probable cause. Mr. Whitman? Okay, I feel like you wanted, I feel like I cheated you guys by not just ruling all on in the end, but.
No, I was gonna submit it anyway.
Okay, you're just trying to make me feel better, Mr. Whitman. Okay, so I do find, Mr. Lee, I know, we've got warrant 23W 15998, 15996, 15995, and 15997, concealing the death of another, felony murder, false imprisonment, and tampering with evidence. The added charges, I've gone ahead and done the preliminary hearing on, but again, instructing the Sheriff's Department to bring the juvenile back to the I'm saying GJAC, but the jail court annex back to 2900 University Parkway to get booked in on those charges before being returned to RYDC. So otherwise, I'm going to get a call about that because the warrants technically haven't been served until he's been booked in on them. If you need an order on that, catch me before I leave. Otherwise, you might need an order? Okay, well, I can handle that. So warrant numbers 23W16064, 065, 066, 067, 068, and 069 are bound over. I do find that the state's met its burden on probable cause. And I guess I will, if you want to wait before, Mr. Whitman did want to speak to his client in the back, correct? Okay.
I don't need to speak to him. We've been talking all evening. In fact, we're taking him down now and hopefully going to give him a sandwich.
Okay, that's good. And then what I'll do is I'll do an order to make sure that's okay with you too, that he gets booked in on those charges.
Yeah, we'd like to get it all taken care of today.
I know. I'm not doing anything about the search warrant though. That's between you and Detective Carter. Okay.
Judge, for the record, I'd like a sandwich too.
You'd like a sandwich too? I appreciate everybody's patience with me. I always am concerned making sure that when we have interpreters that we're able to make sure everyone could see, hear, and understand. It slows the pace of the proceeding down, but it's critical to me that you all were able to understand and participate in the proceeding. Thank you, Madam Interpreters. I appreciate your patience with us as well. If there's nothing further for the record, nothing, speak now? All right. Okay, then we're off the record and court is adjourned.